Okay. So we're taping now, and I appreciate everybody's permission to do that. Faith, has she returned with us? I've already gone ahead. All right, I'm going to. All right, so I've already started. I gave the opening prayer, and I gave some announcements.
Right.
I'm going to type them in the chat, but I wanted to just get started with the parable of the Good Samaritan. So we went from last week with two very bizarre and strange parables that many of us had maybe heard but weren't super familiar with, to, I think, probably one of the most common parables that we've heard, which is fun. Faith, do you want to offer anything before we get started on group questions?
No, only if there is any clarification. He said it in the video and it's in the book, and you probably heard it a number of times. These two, as he put it, were feuding cousins, the Samaritans and the Jews. And so there was that sense of, this is not my best friend. There, it's kind of like, can anything good come from a Samaritan? So it's kind of an oxymoron when we say Good Samaritan, because for the people there, that isn't how they would have viewed those people. So if you go into it with that background, the only thing that I lifted up with Dana when we discussed this, and by the way, Dana, I think he did a better job in the video than in the book.
I thought the exact same thing.
But was that going back and forth and testing and asking questions was a common Jewish way of teaching. The rabbis expected their students to challenge them and ask questions, and they expected to test the students by the questions that they were asking. So we just keep that in mind as we read the parable. Once again, I think the most important thing that you get from the parable is, where do you stand in it? With whom do you identify? Because it makes a total difference in how you read it, depending on who you are in it.
That's right. Okay. So we can go ahead and open it up, share any questions or reflections, or I can ask the first question. Did anybody have any? I mean, this is a common parable. Anything interesting that come up? Jonathan and Carol Sadler. Okay, Jonathan, I'll let you go first. Go ahead.
I was struck by his misreading of the scripture. He left out a very important part. He says, scripture says, love God and love your neighbor. And he left out about as yourself. And that, to me, that's been a classic error of the church for a long time, focusing on just helping others and not focusing on loving yourself. So that bothered me. But anyway, we got off on that foot. The next one is, we look at these Samaritans and Jews, and it's kind of like the Hatfields and McCoys, as Faith was talking about. Well, in today's world, we have the liberals and the conservatives and the Democrats and the Republicans, and they each seem to be unable to look at the other one realistically. So both sides are looking at the other side and seeing how terrible they are. Mm. And it occurred to me, maybe it would be interesting if those on the left could look at Trump and see good things that he was doing for them. Like the Samaritan looking at the man who helps the victim of the robbers, who looks at the Samaritan and sees that this really strange person is helping him. Anyway, to be able to open our minds to that sort of thing, that was part of the message that came through to me. Anyway, and I find myself in both positions. I remember the time that my daughter, who was dating a black boy at that time, and I was very proud of myself because I grew up with heavy prejudice against blacks. And my way of solving that was to recognize the person was black and then check myself and be sure to be good to him, be nice to him. I was so proud of that. I told my daughter that, and says, that's terrible. You're not supposed to recognize any difference. So maybe that's a lesson in this parable too. You're not supposed to recognize any difference. Just enjoy people as people. And sometimes I find myself as the injured person on the road and having to accept good stuff from other people that ordinarily wouldn't. And other times I find myself as the privileged one and having to, reach out to them. One time I had a church service at this wonderful big black church in Los Angeles. And it occurred to me that everybody there in our different skins had white teeth. Inside, we were all the same. And I told the pastor that, and he appreciated it. And I also realized that we had white fear and black fear. And he talks about that in the video. And we have Republican fear and Democrat fear. And we have to get beyond that and just be people together. And I think that's what this is trying to teach us.
Okay, thank you. All right, Carol Sadler. Let me see. Let me unmute. Go ahead. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Well, I think it was when I was watching the Amy Levine video about this parable that she was talking about who the Samaritans were and how little their differences were, sort of like between Protestants and Christians now. But another thing she had talked about was that Samaria was what would be today's West Bank. And that really struck me because I had, visited Israel rather recently, and the West Bank is right there, adjacent to Israel, and in fact, I think the Israelis are now wanting to claim the West Bank, but and present day Arabs in the West Bank, don't look that much different than the folks in Israel. Not the Europeans that have come in, of course, but so there really wasn't all that much difference. And I kind of picked up on the point that it wasn't like there was this, really person from outer space that came and was so different. It was someone pretty much like the individual who had fallen and been beaten up and so forth. And I just got a whole different perspective on this after reading and watching the videos, that so much different than what my traditional background on this particular parable had been.
Well, that's good. All right. Okay. So the first question, and this is really what he's going into, is the author claims that when we, the readers, emphasize the theme of doing charitable acts across cultural lines, it puts us in a position of privilege, choosing the recipients of our charity. So the first thing is how do you respond to this idea? And I'll put it up here in a minute so you can read it again. And then second, do we need to shift from seeing this parable as doing charitable acts to identifying opportunities that create vulnerable connections with people who aren't like us? So I'm going to go ahead and share that so you can read it again. I'm going to, okay, that's too large. There we go. Okay. So it's B. So I mean, what do you think about this? Do you agree with him? Do you think that it emphasized the theme? Do you think that the theme has typically been emphasizing charitable acts, and that puts us in a position of privilege? So I'm gonna. The challenging thing is I can't keep it up because I can't see your hands. Well, I can't. I can try to see. So raise your hand if you'd like to offer something, and I'll kind of scroll through here and see who I can find.
We got Carol Sterling and Kathy
Okay. All right.
Blakely.
Okay. Hold on. I'm going back over because when I share, there's Kathy Blakely. Okay. Kathy Blakely, unmute.
And Carol Sterling, yes.
Okay. So I'll go to Kathy first because she came out, and then I'll go. Okay. Go ahead, Kathy. You can unmute yourself and Now she disappeared. Oh, she can't unmute herself? Why does it not let me undo it? I don't understand. All right, hold on, let me. There you go, there you go, you're done. Good.
I was struck by the way this parable shifted the viewpoint, which is really interesting. But then thinking about what you're just saying too, was the Samaritan actually a person of privilege at this point?
Mm.
Because we're saying that he, you know, and I really understand that viewpoint, you know, as far as, you know, not being the person privileged as being just handing out goodies and things like that. But I was just wondering, was he a person of privilege at this point? Because basically, you know, we don't know that much about him actually. That was just my question.
He's not, from the story itself, he's not a poor person. So it depends on how you're using the word privilege here. If it's person of privilege that I can give and therefore give, and I have the privilege because I have enough so I can share, because he obviously has substance.
Mm-hmm.
There, he has money to pay, he has a donkey. I mean, he does have, he is in a privileged position to give at that point, but in the society, he was looked down upon. And in answer to June's question, we say Good Samaritan because of Luke. We associate it with this parable.
What do you mean? We say, so when did the modifier good get added to the word Samaritan? So you mean good?
It's based on Luke's parable.
Okay, so it's based on Luke's parable. And Carol Serling, you yes, were you the next one? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I do think that most of the time, a lot of charitable acts are performed where we kind of see I know for myself, I mean, we're not wealthy, but we do give when we can to different causes and different things at the church and help out. And it does seem like, well, we have sufficient to be able to share with those who are in need. And I don't know if that's a privileged position so much as it seems to demand a response of generosity out of gratitude for what we have. And
yeah.
I'm going to admit something that's not very flattering to myself. The end of the video that I tuned into at the end, where he kind of talked about his own feelings when involved with, he talked about his own little level of groups of friends, you know, kind of similar. They're similar in terms of financial ability and perspective and this sort of thing. I think we all naturally identify with those and tend to gravitate to spend time with those who are kind of more like ourselves, right? This is very natural. Human beings like to do that. So I find sometimes when I have reached out and it's been more hands-on with people as opposed to just writing a check somewhere, there's a little voice in me that is a little bit worried that I'll be connected eternally to this person because I've reached out, and that I don't know if I'm ready to extend my circle on an ongoing basis. Does anyone understand this?
Yes.
And I feel a little ashamed about that. But I do notice that it's there. And I like Jonathan was saying, sometimes we can notice something and see that we have a kind of, you might say, skewed perspective or prejudice even, and then you have to override it. So you don't have to have everybody come to your house that you help. But I do think that there's a big difference between writing a check to something and actually going to a food bank or actually going to do showers of blessing, and which I've done and many of you have done. And there is a big difference when you have interaction with people, and it's far more satisfying. It really is.
Yeah, it totally is. All right, I think I've got June, and June is your hand up, and then Ray. June, go ahead. I think you have to unmute yourself. For some reason, I am now having a problem unmuting people.
Yeah, just following on with what Carol said in the Amy Jo Levine book, she says that one of the best sermons she ever heard about this parable was by Martin Luther King, and that he commented on the priest and the Levite. You know, they passed the guy by because they were scared of what might happen to them, you know, if they stopped to help, which I've certainly experienced that. But that the Samaritan, his thought was what might happen to the injured man if he didn't stop. So it's kind of getting outside yourself and putting yourself in the other person's position, which is a lot of what we're trying to do, you know, in shedding our ego-driven selves and being vulnerable and stuff. So that was insightful for me.
Yeah, I read AJ's book. I remember that. I remember specifically. She says, especially because with the priest, is that it would be a sign of uncleanliness for the priest to stop and touch.
But it would also mean, because the priests were given a schedule at the temple when they could, and there were so many of them by that time, that if you missed your opportunity, you might not get another. It's like, okay, if you don't get to preach this time, you don't get to preach again. So it really is a question that I think, June, also, though, that you were pointing to, which is, how much am I willing to give up to do this?
Right.
Because it's not just a matter of I'm passing by indifferently. It's, I may have to sacrifice something that's very important to me to tend to this need. I'm sorry, Ray, you go.
And that's kind of what Carol was saying too. Yeah.
All right, Ray, go ahead. You're unmuted.
Hey, yeah, I'm unmuted now. I wanted to ask, on one hand, where do you draw the line between being, quote, charitable and just doing the right thing? And, you know, I guess in our private life, and particularly regarding church, we can make those judgments and so forth. I go back to my military experience where you'll hear very commonly in the military anyway, don't thank me, that's just my job. And where, you know, you're thrown into situations with all kinds of people, whether it's racial or ethnic or religious or political or, you know, geographical. I mean, and oftentimes they're very stressful situations, and people have, you know, high expectations, and there's a, you know, a definition of professionalism where, you know, you just accept that the good people are going to be the ones who are chosen to be leaders and are going to make, based on their own good judgment and how equally they treat other people and how fairly they treat people and things like that. But, you know, like I say, our private life is a small part of what we do. Our professional life, you know, is pretty much 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So sometimes a heck of a lot more than that. And that kind of, you know, expands into your family life. You know, you want to treat people fairly. And at some point you have to say, well, what's the difference between being charitable and just plain doing the right thing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, a great point. I love Ruth's point in the chat. Brandon is a big fan of this. This is systems right here. King also said we have a responsibility to change the system that makes the road so dangerous that people get robbed and beaten. That's a systems change right there, which is really, I think that's the heart of it. How do you change the system? How do you change it so the road is safe for people? That's tough. It's a big question. So any thoughts on either of those? What's the difference between charitable and doing the right thing? Changing the road, making sure the road is not dangerous. Go ahead, Michelle. Oh, hold on. Go ahead.
A life experience actually yesterday, which I could use some advice on, which kind of relates to the
advice.
I went to the market for the first time in weeks, and they had those things on the floor, which, you know, go this way, one way kind of things. And some people didn't realize that those things were on the floor. And I pointed it out to a couple people and they said, oh, I didn't notice, and then they thanked me and that was that. But I came across one woman whose response to my just pointing that out was, I'm a nonconformist. And the tone of her voice said it all. And I didn't know what to do with this.
Nothing. You do nothing with it. You walk away. I mean, you do nothing with that. You're like, great, thank you, have a great day. Moving on. Go far away.
And so to get away from her, I had to go against the traffic or go past her.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a topic right now, the nonconformist. Wait, okay, so I got Joanna and Ray. Like, go ahead, Joanna.
It does kind of, it is kind of related to this as far as being helpful and,
right, somebody who's different than you. Yeah, go ahead, Joanna.
Well, there are times when charity is appropriate, but it doesn't have to be from a point of view of privilege. One of the quotes from our author is at the end of the video was, always see people in their full dignity. And so there are times when you offer help because you're in a position to help someone, not because you've chosen that person because he's deserving. It's because you're there. And what has been going through my mind since I read this chapter for today, back in 2003, when the Cedar fires hit in our East County, our son lost 2 homes in the fires. And, he debated whether he wanted to stay in Julian or not, but he was in line at the post office and a man came up to him and he said, hey, didn't you lose your home? And Tom said, yes. And the man says, I have a guest cottage that you're welcome to use because I know you don't have a place to stay up here. And just feel free to use it. The only condition being that we have family coming in for Christmas. And you may remember that the fires hit in October. And that just, it wasn't because Tom asked for help. And this man didn't do it out of a feeling of superiority. It was just genuine extending help to a person in need. And, but in a sense, it was charitable too, because the man had an option not to do it. And it did cost him something, utilities and all of that. But it has struck me that there really are a lot of very fine people out there. And not all acts of charity are from a position of superiority.
Right. Almost goes to Ray's point. Is it the right thing to do or was it the charitable thing? Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, regarding what Michelle said, I think, during this time of the pandemic, we're going to see a lot of that going on. I had the exact same thing happen to me this morning. I was out on my little 4-mile run and I stopped at 7-Eleven and to buy a lottery ticket. And as I was coming out, a guy was going in without a mask on. And, there's all this conversation about masks, and I happen to believe what the medical people are saying, and that is that you can reduce how much you exhale by like 90%, but it has absolutely no effect on what you inhale. So people running around without masks are being pretty inconsiderate. So anyway, I have this thing about masks. So I said to the guy, kind of halfway expecting to end up in a fight, I said, what, no mask? And instead of getting obstinate about it, the way that Michelle described, he said, oh gosh, oh hey, I'm sorry, thank you. And he turned around and ran back to his car. But I think we're going to see a lot of that. On last night's news, for example, there was a preacher from South Bay Pentecostal Church who was ranting. Maybe some of you saw it, but he was ranting about how essential church services are and how everybody should be able to gather. And I'm thinking, what an idiot. I try to generally reserve judgment on people, but this is a time when you're going to see the character of those kind of people come out, and the guy's an idiot. There's just no two ways about it.
Yeah, I feel sad for him. He clearly is empty in some way, shape, or form. I'm not sure what's led him down that path of emptiness, but it's a sad plight he must have in his heart. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know how to address the nonconformist. I think they're out there. I think you just have to be sensible and smart, and certainly I would encourage you not to get into fights. So glad that didn't happen. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, no, it's funny because one of my friends just posted on the Facebook this picture of all these girls hanging on a bar and one girl hanging the other way around, and the meme was, "Don't follow the crowd." And as a nation, we have often been, don't follow the crowd, be an individual, stand for what you believe is right. For me, that's also has to be colored by what is needed for the common good. What is best for all? There are times when I'm going to go against the stream, and I've done that a lot of my life, where I'm not, just because you tell me I can't, I'm not okay. But I think there is that question of, and that goes back to Ray's, what is the right thing? And sometimes the right thing is the charitable thing. And sometimes we do it because we need to do it for the sake of others. I need to set aside what is even best for me for the sake of somebody else.
Yeah. And I think every situation is different. I mean, I think you could argue that the parable of the Good Samaritan is the uncommon thing, right? It's not, he did something uncommon, whether it was the person in the ditch who was beaten or the person who helped him, but yet it was for the betterment of all, right? It was to avoid doing harm. And so in this case, where it comes to wearing masks, it's not the, it's we want to do what everybody is doing, which is wear masks, which is the common thing, but it's also, again, to not hurt other people, right? So we want to do no harm, right? That's the theme right now, is do no harm. And so, yeah, I think situations are unique, and you have to think about them in different ways, but it's always about the intention. I think intention is a big word here with this parable, and with everything that we do, is what is your intention behind it? If you dig deep into your heart, why are you doing it, what you're doing? Whether it's donating money, whether it's going to volunteer somewhere, whether it's not doing something, I would say inertia, not doing something. What are we not doing? And why are we not doing it? What are we afraid of? All right, Jonathan?
I would like to introduce the parable of the Boy Scout that helps the old lady across the street. And when he gets to the other side, he says, "I'm so proud of myself. I've done my good deed for the day." And she says, "I didn't want to go."
Yeah.
Okay, the point is, who are you doing the charitable work for? The charity, the beneficiary, or you? And I know a classic statement about that from, some of you know, Laura Luxemburg. Anyway, she was over in Africa one day, and she was the guest of somebody who was head of a big charitable organization. And some tribal person said for their clinic, we need to have a refrigerator. And this lady said, "Well, we've got stoves to give." So she gave them a stove. And Laura listened to this and said, "We can do better than that." And she went and out of her own money bought a refrigerator for this lady, this clinic, and got them what they needed. And then when the lady who ran the big charity found out about it, she was mad. She was mad at Laura for showing her up. Says, "Now how can I go back to my donors and tell them that we didn't do a good job of giving these people, being charitable givers?" And so it was just a terrible example of, you have to be careful. What are you doing this for? For yourself? You giving all that money for yourself, or you're really giving it to help people? And try and focus on helping the people genuinely as they need, not as you need.
Yeah, that was I did an evangelism class, and that's a big topic with missionaries, or that was a topic with missionaries, is when you're going out to do mission work, are you really doing it for yourself, or are you really doing it for them and giving them what they need, or are you doing it for what you need to do?
Well, I think Carol Sterling touched on where I would come down on this, which is that which we do is a response of gratitude to the grace of God which has been given for us. Grace demands response. And one of the responses of grace is generosity and caring for others in need. And so if it's grounded, I mean, we tend to think of, well, grace is a gift and I don't have to do anything. But it's precisely because I've received, I need to give. So it really isn't dependent on what you need.
No, but I think
it's dependent on what I need.
I agree, but I mean, I think you really need to dissect that statement and make sure you in your heart really appreciate and have the right intent, because you can see how somebody could easily take that statement and still, if they're not self-aware, they could turn that around to say, well, no, this, I am doing what's good. Because I don't know, I think sometimes it's so esoteric that it's hard to really understand the true intent of it.
Well, if you don't have gratitude for what, if you don't see how undeserving you are of what you've been given.
Yes, that's, you have to have that first and foremost. I did like this quote from Brene Brown that came up this week. And I think until we can receive with an open heart, we're never really giving with an open heart. And I just think that's exactly what you're saying. Like, we have to be able to receive with an open heart. We have to be humble. I like that quote. And then the second question on here was actually from, so Faith had sent me some notes from various sermons that she had put together over the years.
I didn't send her the sermons.
She didn't send me the sermons, just the notes. And it was interesting. This question was, with this parable, Jesus reminds us of two truths. No one is outside our concern. No one cannot have a gift for us. I love that. No one cannot have a gift for us. So how does the person who's experiencing homelessness have a gift for us? How does the person of color have a gift for us? How does the LGBTQ person have a gift? Because that's what it's saying. If you are white, cisgender, there are people out, like they have a gift. They have a gift. Donna, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I have a question. Is there such a thing as doing a truly selfless act? I mean, how can you take the quality of how I feel when I do something good? Does anybody do something good without feeling good?
It's a good question. Anybody? Ruth, you have go ahead. Go ahead, Ruth. You're unmuted.
Oh, okay. Sometimes you need to do the right thing, even if you don't have the right reasons, even if you're not all right in yourself. I mean, if we wait until we're perfect, nobody's going to do anything. Mm-hmm. There's always a self-motivation. There's always some kind of selfish reason behind it. But it shouldn't stop you from doing the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you're right. There's probably always something there. Oh, Ken and Marie, go ahead.
Let me back up what Ruth just said. On page 64 in the book.
Yep, 64 in the book.
He says that we have to stop evaluating potential neighbors and become a neighbor. And I know that's what I do. Like, for example, if I'm going to buy a house, I ask the realtor, what kind of neighbors do I have or will I have? And when I move into a neighborhood, I want to evaluate the neighbors and whether they have a dog or noisy kids or whatever, you see. And so I should just make a decision. I'm gonna be a neighbor. That's what I'm gonna do, regardless of these my neighbors that aren't perfect. And so that's kind of, I'm kind of backing up what Ruth said.
I think that's a great.
I do evaluate. I evaluate people all the time as to whether I want to deal with them or whether give them something. And I'm always trying to figure out, should I do this or shouldn't I do this? And are they good people or why are they doing that and all that stuff.
Great, you're human. That's awesome. You're human, just like all of us. We all do that. And if you are sitting there right now saying, oh, I don't do that, you are, you do it. All right, go ahead, Ruth. And then I'll go down to Ray.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Shannon if she'd comment on, this comment that was just made about when people do good things or when you feel good, is it because you've done good things? Or, I mean, I know that psychologically people have self-doubt and people have guilt and people do things for different motivations and stuff. But I'd like Shannon's take on the psychology of feeling good and how that applies here.
All right. So let me have Ruth and then Shannon. Shannon, you can contemplate your answer. Go ahead, Ruth.
I think that the Samaritan identified with the guy who was lying there. And I think that was part of it. And so I think it's the relationship between, us and the other that is the key to all this. Mm-hmm. in that. And another point I want to make is that to Jonathan's very much earlier thing, we are all different. We are different. And we need to respect and understand, try to understand each other's differences. We're not all the same. So.
Yeah. All right, Shannon, go ahead. And then we'll go into small groups.
All right, I don't think I have anything very profound to say, but positive psychologists, I mean, they do study that people that volunteer, that does boost their immune system and make them happier. And I think we've been reading some books. I don't remember if it was Adam Hamilton or people have talked about that when we engage in like being generative, like maybe that releases dopamine and, other feel good hormones. And, but I think one thing that I've been noticing in these parables is like, it seems like there's a through line, which is all these parables are teaching us something about love and like what love looks like, and I think like we were created out of love, and when we embody love, that's an abundant life, that is what, bodes well for good mental health and a good society. So I think there's definitely a theme about the importance of love.
Well, and we're social animals. So, you can talk to a lot of people who it's the law of the jungle and all about survival of the fittest and all that kind of stuff. So is there any true altruistic behavior? But I think evolutionary biologists are, study that. And it's very complex with human beings because we're such social animals. And sometimes there is a biological imperative to be altruistic, to live in a complex society. So it's complicated, I think.
It's complicated. All right. So let's break up into breakout rooms, and the question that you can continue on with this discussion. I think it's very insightful. Or you can also talk about with whom do you identify within this story? Over the years, has there been one person that you've tended to identify with, and has that changed? Who don't you want to be helped by? I mean, that's a tough question to answer for yourself. You got to open up, be vulnerable, but who would you not want to be helped by? So go ahead and ponder that for a while. I'm going to go ahead. I'll give you 12 minutes. I'm going to pause the
next week.
So next week, you know what? I don't have the book.
It's the story of the prodigal God.
The story of the prodigal God.
The parable of the prodigal God.
Okay, so that's next week, which is the 29th. Carol, certainly you have a question. Go ahead.
It's the parable for the prodigal God, not the prodigal son.
Yeah, you ponder that this week.
I knew she did.
And we'll tell you what it
I'm
means.
not even going to address this.
All right.
That wasn't a slip.
I didn't think so. I know you're setting us up again.
Yeah,
I am.
Yep. So that's next week. Faith, do you want to do a closing prayer, and then we'll just? Oh, Marie, you have a question. Go ahead.
We'll be watching you from Arizona next week.
All right, you travel safe.
So safe travels. So what day are you leaving?
Sunday.
Right
Sunday.
after you, right after your sermon. We're staying here specifically.
All right, yay! All right, give me feedback. Let me know. But
It's worth hearing.
She's so sweet. She's so sweet.
No, I told you I don't give that.
He doesn't. Yeah. Wait, Carol.
I say a sermon's good.
Are you doing the
the
coffee hour after?
Yeah, hold on. Yes, yeah, I think so. Yeah, Carol, go ahead.
How far are you from being ordained? What faith are you in?
Oh,
4 years.
Oh,
years.
Yeah. So here, the ordination process in the Methodist Church is insane. Like legitimately, I personally think it's ridiculous, but that's neither here nor there. But I just went through, I did my very first interviews, which is just to become a certified candidate. So right now I'm a certified candidate. Now I have to go and I have a master's, but I have to get a second master's. So that's why I'm going to Duke. So I'll be at Duke for the next 2 to 3 years. And then during that process, then I can become commissioned. No, then I become ordained. I become commissioned, then ordained. So it's
where is Duke? Where's Duke again? Is that Maryland?
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Yeah.
So your family's moving?
No, I can do it online.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I'll go back and forth, but obviously not this year. They've canceled all the residency programs this year. Everything will just be online. But in January, I'm hoping I'll be there for a week or so. And then to Eleanor's question, yeah, I'm going to do coffee hour, but I think you guys can log in without me. So if I'm not there, just start it.
Well, we're just going to give you feedback then. No.
Excellent. I will definitely log in.
No. Don't give her public feedback.
Oh. It doesn't. I'm fine. To be honest with you, I appreciate feedback, and I try not to take things personally. It's hard to do, but I've worked on that for a very long time. But I do welcome your feedback, and I will welcome it. So certainly, absolutely.
Well, you cut yourself now.
All right.
Dana?
Yeah.
Are you going to become an elder or a deacon?
A deacon.
Okay.
At the moment.
That could change.
You know, the whole church has no idea what it's doing in the future. To talk about something 4 years down the road,
it's so hard.
We have no idea what's going to happen.
I mean, the deacon role is ideal just partly because my background is in nonprofit leadership and management. And so the deacon is really about service, justice, compassion, and the word. And so that's really where most of my time is spent right now, is just on service and justice for sure. Certainly with at-risk children and youth, although lately I've had a very strong call. I'm struggling with the homelessness issue that Encinitas is having right now. And I'm very troubled by the inaction of the leadership in the city of Encinitas and in the North County coastal communities. I'm annoyed by it, frankly. I'm just very, anyway, I was on the email with Randa Krakow yesterday. So if anybody has any thoughts on the people experiencing homelessness in coastal North County, I would entertain them. So,
aren't you encouraged by the city approving that homeless parking lot?
I mean, absolutely, but it's 25 spaces. It's so insignificant, and it's literally like ripping teeth to get the Encinitas to get people to approve it, and it's. So absolutely, I love it, but it is a drop in the bucket.
Oh.
And we have nothing in the coastal communities for people experiencing homelessness, we don't have anywhere for them to go. Interfaith is in Escondido. The city of San Diego has converted buildings and they've got hotels. There was an article in the paper 2 days ago that what's happening out in Spring Valley, they're using hotels, and we're just not doing anything.
The different communities.
Mm-hmm. I know, but we have a lot of homeless activity at the church, and I struggle with what are we, we don't lock the gates, we don't put a guard there, but we're not putting a bathroom for them, we're not giving them food. I don't know, don't get me going. All right. My dad is rolling his eyes.
Okay.
I'm on my soapbox.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question on a totally unrelated topic before we all sign off? Maybe.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I got Netflix, like you talked about, so I could watch the movies. And my television is older. It's got a HDMI port,